The Lee Pro 1000, a progressive press. Set up right now to load 45 ACP. The Pro 1000 is a fully progressive press where after a first few initial pulls of the handle, a loaded round is produced every time the handle is pulled as the carriage rotates. It's got 3 stages. This first stage is where the old primer is removed, depriming, and the case is reshaped, reformed back to its original configuration. As the handle goes and the carriage comes down, the primer is installed on the bottom of this stroke down at this second station. See that over here. And then as the carriage goes up to this die, the case mouth is belled, opened up a little bit to better receive a bullet, and the powder is dropped into that case. As that case comes down to this final station, you can get a bullet feeder that does that automatically, but I feed by hand. And then when that final bullet is set on top of the case, after I've looked in the case to see that there's powder in it, it goes up to the top of the stroke, and then the bullet is set to its proper depth and with this last die, and then the case mouth is crimped around that bullet to hold it tight until it fires. So it comes around, it hits this little ejector pin, and then the loaded round goes down and falls into the receiving bin. So that's the full progressive operation of the Pro 1000. Other presses have more stations, but this is probably the most basic press you'll get. But for me, it works fine. I've loaded a lot of rounds. And now here's that sequence in action. So at this first stage, the case has already been placed, and we're going up. The case is being resized. You see the case in the back. Get powder. Now the carriage rotates. And now the primer right there was set into that case. We can see that there's powder in this case. Bullet gets set on. These bullets are slippery. You can't hang on to them. And of course, this all happens much faster, but do not talk and load ammo. Bad things may happen. So I'm going very slow just for demonstration purposes. And then, since all 3 stations are active on that stroke, 3 cases had their various processes done to it. And the round comes out and drops down. So that's the 3-station Lee Pro 1000. A lot of people don't like the Pro 1000. They think it doesn't prime well. I made just a minor change by taking out the lever that lets the priming pin drop. That gives the primer more time in the cycle to get into position on the priming pin, so it primes easier. So it's only a 3-station machine, but I've had good luck as long as you keep the primer magazine filled to a decent capacity, and we'll run. So we're done with no case in the first station. That'll come up empty in the second station when it's time to prime, and we'll just see what that looks like. This is the only downside of removing that priming stop lever. So we go through, and we'll see here. That there's the primer on top of that priming pin. It just takes a pair of tweezers I use to go in and remove it. just makes the priming so much more reliable. Because the other way, as the case would come past this point, it would flip that lever and let this pin drop, and the primer would get into position. But that is only, it takes a fraction of a second. It's the only time it has to do that. And it's just not enough time to reliably get that primer in and where it needs to go. When one tube runs out, I keep spare cases here to just add one into the mix as we go. It's going to be hard to do this with one hand. And then that allows me to change the case feed. And on this bottom stroke, I can feel there's a primer right here, and I make sure that I get a solid grip and really feel that that primer is seating in that case. So I know that I have positive priming, and I have that primer set all the way to the bottom of the case. And we can see that my primers are getting low here, so I won't run many more rounds. That's about the maximum primer depletion you should run, because it keeps pressure on the primers. You keep pushing them through if you keep more in there. I typically don't put more than 50 in at a time, so half a pack of primers. But on just a small, relatively easy pace, I'm probably running 7 to 8 rounds a minute, which 200 rounds goes out, I can do a half hour, a little more maybe, to easily have enough extra ammo to shoot. So the loading of primers in the Pro 1000 tray is pretty simple. So what we do is pack of primers, and I've already used half of these primers already. And on top, flip it over. Be careful of our precious primers. And the ones that are not upright, just slide this around. They will eventually all place in the proper orientation. Okay, that's all of them. And then these are the primers that I pulled out of the process for various reasons. Make sure that that's on. I know there's a new style of priming magazine for some of the newer machines, a triangular shaped one. This is the one I've always had. It's always worked well for me. And this is what I use. And then load it onto the machine. Basically stop from coming out and load them in. Make sure it's fully seated before we let them go. Make sure this is on, and then give them a tap. Make sure they fill up. As the carriage goes up and down, this pin here is supposed to ride on these ridges and shake the the primer magazine, but that doesn't work reliably, I've found, just to make sure that they fill up. So occasionally, when my hand's up in this part of the stroke, I'll just give it a little tap, make sure the primers get into position, and then on the case feed. You just dump cases in the top, shake them, and they'll load themselves. Typically, they'll end up rim side down. Occasionally, you get one that goes in upside down, and you just see that when it gets pushed out into the first station, and you flip it over. It's not a perfect setup, but runs well. Runs well for me. Thanks. I have all my Pro 1000s mounted to a piece of, I guess this is 2x12, and then just C-clamp it to this part of my bench here. It's not the greatest setup, but it's been working for quite a few years for me. The plan this year is to upgrade the whole reloading station here, make it a little more solid. There's some movement, but it hasn't really affected how I load ammo or my productivity, so I can't complain. And then when it's time for different caliber, I have another machine set up for 9mm or 40 or 38 special. I just same thing, just swap them in. I can keep the dies set, you know, and then really relatively quickly change over. What I do when I initially set it up, I'll put a line between the movable part of the die, the seating die, and then the body of the seating die. Put a line across, and then when I screw it out and make adjustments for a specific bullet, I will note that it took maybe 6 turns out for the proper seating of that particular bullet, that brand and style of bullet. So if I'm changing bullets, I can look up that info and make that change, and it's real close. And then maybe as you load a couple of rounds, you know, you fine tune it, but you don't need to adjust the depth of the body, because that's set. That'll be the, you know, the amount of crimp we're putting on, or the setup of, you know, the powder drop die, because that will set the case mouth bell as it comes into that position. We note, you know, what powder charge each disc hole throws, you know, on a known powder. Again, we're throwing about 5.1 of 231, which I've loaded a lot of those under 200 grain bullets, and that on my chrono puts out about 850 feet per second pretty reliably. I used to load a lot of lead bullets, plain lead, but I've now switched to polymer coated, just cleaner. Still have some lead bullets left, but typically now this is my go-to, and they're kind of priced between a plated bullet and a plain lead bullet. They don't smoke, supposedly less, you know, wear on your barrel as opposed to fully jacketed bullets, but a plain lead bullet will give a little more velocity than a jacketed bullet due to the friction involved. So that's my basic setup. Been loading Pro 1000s for years. I have, well, you know, tens of thousands of rounds I've loaded on them. And again, I've picked some of them up fairly cheap. Probably bought a couple of them for $50–$60. So they've worked well for me. So finally, after loading, you end up with loaded rounds. I load them into either used factory boxes or these plastic boxes. Just makes it easier. Count them out and see. Some people just dump them in a big box or something, keep them more in a bag. I put them in these. It takes a few extra minutes to load, but they're easy to count out if I need a specific number of rounds to do something. They're easy to count. They're easy to keep track of boxes. I know what I have in stock. So that's what I do when they're done. And plus I put them in nose down, because it's easy to then go and see if there's any primer issues. You can run your finger across all the rounds and see if there's a high primer in there or not. I have there's a 50 round box, I have 100 round boxes that I'll sometimes put these into. And they're all said and done. And then, once I have them all boxed up, take my blue marker and I run them down. So at the range, I know what brass is mine. If I drop loaded rounds on the ground, I know that they're mine, not somebody else's. I just run a line down them. And people I shoot with actually know that the blue line is my ammo. This marker is pretty beat, so it's getting a pretty sloppy line. But that's where that ends up. And then I'll relabel this to tell me what's in the box and what that load is.